Hi, my name is Gail. If you know me, you know that I'm a huge fan of all of the tools that come from Studio 180 Design. Deb Tucker, owner of Studio 180 Design, has come up with a whole bunch of tools to make your quilting more accurate and precise to help you be a better quilter. Today, I'm going to show you all about the Tucker trimmer, one of my favorite tools and one that I think every quilter out there should own. Let's get started. There are 3 different Tucker trimmer tools: a Tucker trimmer 1, a Tucker trimmer 2, and a Tucker trimmer 3. One of the great things about these tools is they all do a number of different sizes. The Tucker trimmer 1 and Tucker trimmer 3 go in 1/2 inch and whole inch increments. The Tucker trimmer 2 goes in 1/4 inch and 3/4 inch increments. The Tucker trimmer 1 and the Tucker trimmer 2 each do 11 different size units. And the Tucker trimmer 3, which you could kind of think of the Tucker trimmer 1 on steroids, does 24 different sized units from 1 inch to 12.5 inches. With each tool, you get a wonderful set of instructions. Inside the instructions is a chart that gives you all of the cutting requirements when you are making your blocks. So if you are doing a pattern and it tells you you need to have a 4-inch finished half square triangle, all you would do is go to the cutting chart, you would look up the number on the chart and it would tell you what size of squares you have to cut. Her instructions are wonderfully written, and they also have left-handed instructions to help ease some of that frustration that left-handed quilters feel when they're trying to figure out how to use the tools. Should you lose your instructions, all you have to do is go to the Studio 180 Design website and you can download the instructions for each and every one of her tools and print them for yourself or save them to a device. Deb has thought of everything. So today I'm going to be demonstrating the Tucker trimmer 1, and the first unit that we're going to talk about is the half square triangle. So to make a half square triangle, you'll start off with 2 pieces of fabric, 1 of each color. The size would be indicated in the chart that came with the tool. You'll put these 2 pieces right side together, and using another great tool from Studio 180 Design, the Quilter's Magic Wand, this marks a scant 1/4 inch to give you your stitching lines. There is a laser etched line that goes down the center, and you'll place that onto your 1 square, and using a marking tool of your choice, you will mark your stitching lines on either side. Take this to the machine, stitch on those lines, and then you'll cut them apart. Once you cut them apart, you're going to end up with 2 half square triangles. This one has already been trimmed. This one still needs to be trimmed. So to trim the half square triangle using the Tucker trimmer 1, we're going to trim these to 4.5 by 4.5 unfinished. So I'm going to take this common diagonal line, which runs diagonally on the tool, and I am going to place it onto my seam line. Since I am trimming this to 4.5 by 4.5, I want to make sure that there is fabric going all around that measurement, and there is. So now I'm going to trim up the right-hand side and across the top. That's another great thing, you can trim 2 sides at one time. Then I'm going to rotate my unit 180 degrees. I'm going to place the 4.5 inch lines on the 2 sides that I just trimmed. I'm going to line up the common diagonal along my seam line again, and I'm going to trim the remaining 2 sides. And here I have 2 perfect 4.5 inch by 4.5 inch half square triangles. And you'll see, even though these units were made slightly larger, than they needed to be, allowing us to trim them down to the perfect size using the Tucker Trimmer 1. There is very, very little waste. The next units that we're going to learn how to make is the hourglass or quarter square triangle unit. Once again, we start off by making half square triangles as we did in the previous demo. Now I'm going to take my 2 half square triangles, I'm going to put them right sides together with the colors opposite each other. I'm going to make sure the seam down the center nests, and once again I'm going to use my quilter's magic wand and a marking pencil of my choice to mark my stitching lines. I'll take this to the machine, stitch on the lines, and cut it apart. Once I've cut it apart and pressed it, I now have an hourglass unit that's ready to be trimmed. Here's a tip. This is a great place for you to spin the seams when you're pressing it. By spinning the seams in the back, it gives you a much flatter center. So when I go to trim this one, once again, it's going to be 4.5 by 4.5 inches. I am going to place the common diagonal that runs diagonally on the tool along one seam line, and I'm going to put the 4.5 inch dashed line along the other seam line. Once I've got it all nicely lined up, I see I have fabric going all the way around my 4.5 inch measurements. I'm going to trim up the right hand side and across the top. I'm then going to rotate my unit 180 degrees. I'm going to line up the 4.5 inch lines on the 2 sides that I just finished trimming. Once again, the common diagonal will run along the seam line, and I'm going to trim the final 2 sides. This gives me an absolutely perfect 4.5 inch by 4.5 inch hourglass unit. And once again, even though these were made slightly larger, there's very, very little waste. It really pays to have accurate, precise units when you're starting to put them into your blocks. The next unit that I'm going to be making is a combination unit. So combination units look like this. So it's like a half square triangle and 2 quarter square triangles. So to make that unit, you start off by making half square triangles like you did in the previous demos. Once we have the half square triangle, we're going to marry it up with our other color of fabric. Because this has been sewn once, although these squares were all cut the same size initially, they're going to be a little bit smaller because this one's been stitched once. Center it on your unit, take your quilter's magic wand, and once again, you are going to look at the smaller unit, place the laser etched line diagonally, and you're going to use a marking pencil to draw your stitching lines. Once you have your stitching lines, you're going to take this to the machine and you're going to stitch. Cut it apart diagonally between your lines, and then you're going to press, and you are going to have mirror image combination units. This one has already been trimmed. We're going to use our Tucker Trimmer one to trim this one. So I'm going to place the unit so that the common diagonal, the long black line, is going to be on the seam line between the quarter square triangles. And then, because these are getting trimmed to 4.5 by 4.5, my 4.5 inch dashed line is going to be going along the long seam line. Once again, I'm going to make sure that I have fabric going all the way around my 4.5 inch measurement before I do any trimming. And I'm going to trim up the right hand side and across the top. I'll rotate my block 180 degrees. I will line up the 4.5 inch lines on the two sides that I just trimmed. The 4.5 inch dashed line will be going down the long seam line. And once again, the common diagonal will be going along the seam line between the two quarter square triangles. And I'll trim up the right hand side, across the top once again, and I'll have another perfect combination unit. So this technique gives you mirror image combination units. And once again, my units are perfect and I have very little waste. There's also a technique that Studio 180 Design has brought out, and it's called non-mirror image combination units. So if you need, let's say, all of your units to have the purple here and the white here, there's another technique that you can follow that will give you 4 identical units. So it's another one to check out. So there's usually a technique that goes with each of Deb Tucker's tools. And the technique that goes with the Tucker Trimmer 1, or one of the techniques, is the shaded 4 patch. So Deb has technique sheets that go with all of her techniques for the various tools. This is the technique sheet for the shaded 4 patch from Studio 180 Design. On each of the technique sheets, it tells you what tool you would use to make the technique, and it also gives you some stars that denotes the level of difficulty for this particular technique. There's a wealth of information on the technique sheet. For instance, for the shaded 4 patch, which looks like this, it tells you what size you have to cut all the pieces to compile the unit. This is a common unit you see in quilting, and most patterns will tell you to cut a square, to place a triangle onto either side of that square, and then to attach another triangle to it. And hopefully, once you get that all done, you end up with a unit that's the correct size. Well, Deb has taken this to a much better level. Instead of having little triangles that you're attaching and then adding a big triangle, this is all done with strip piecing. No bias edges, and like her other techniques, it's going to be slightly larger than it needs to be, and you trim it down to the perfect size. So following the technique sheet, which gives you all the directions with diagrams, right hand and left hand cutting, and ideas for blocks, you are going to cut 2 strips of fabric, and I didn't have enough to leave another sample in strips, but you can imagine this is a long strip of the lighter one and a long strip of the darker purple. You sew the narrow strip to the wide strip. Then you subcut your strips to the subcut measurement that's indicated on the technique chart. Once you have your unit subcut, you put 2 of them together, stitch them down the long side, do a quick little snip in the middle, and then you press them. Which way do you press them? That little snip tells this block which way it wants to be pressed. Once you have that done, it's time to draw your stitching lines on the back of the unit. So you take your Tucker trimmer, and the common diagonal, the long line that runs diagonally on the tool, gets placed along the bottom of your unit. You slide it along until you have it positioned such that it's going right through where these 2 thread lines intersect, and you draw your first stitching line. Then you just slide your tool over. You keep the common diagonal lined up on the bottom of your unit. You move it now till it's going to go right through where these 2 stitching lines intersect, and you draw your second stitching line. Now that you have your stitching lines, you marry this rectangle up with the rectangle that forms your large triangle, and you're going to stitch on those lines. By stitching on those lines and taking a little peek before you cut them apart, you'll see that you're going to be getting the unit that you're going for, a shaded 4-patch. And bonus, for every one of these you make, you get 2 shaded 4-patch units. So I've stitched on the line and then I've cut it apart. And now it's time to trim it. So I've pressed my unit, and let's trim this one to 4.5 by 4.5 as well. You put the common diagonal so that it's going to go right through that tip where that little square is. And I'm going to place the 4.5-inch dashed line on my main seam line. Once I have that all lined up, and yes, I still always look to make sure I have fabric going all the way around the measurement that I need, I'm going to trim the right-hand side and across the top. And then, as we did previously, I'm going to rotate my block 180 degrees. I'm going to line up my 4.5-inch sizing lines on the 2 sides I just trimmed. My 4.5-inch dashed line will go down my main seam, and once again the common diagonal is going to go right through the tip of that little square. So now I'll just finish trimming the other 2 sides, up the right and across the top. So by strip piecing and putting it together with the rectangles, I end up with 2 shaded 4-patch units, and once again, very little waste. It is so worth the little bit of trimming that you have to do for each of these units to get units that are the perfect size. Quilters always pay attention to, when they're quilting, to get the best 1/4-inch seam that they can get. When you are making your units, sometimes it's just the more seams that you have to sew, the harder it is to get a unit that comes out being the perfect size. With the Tucker tools, the whole premise behind them is that you make your units a tiny bit bigger than they need to be, and you trim them down using the tool to the exact size that you need them to be. Not only does this make you a better at accuracy and precision, your blocks will turn out better, and it's not really a matter of should I use these tools, it's like, why would you not use these tools? They are absolutely fantastic, and I can honestly say it's really the only way I quilt. So if I were to go and make a pattern that needed to have a whole bunch of half-square triangles, let's say, the pattern instructions would tell me to cut my fabric a certain size. Well, all I need to know is, when I'm making those units, what size do they need to be unfinished or finished? And I will then go to my chart on my instructions that came with the tool, and I will look up, okay, if I am making half-square triangles, what's the size that I need to cut my fabric? If I'm making 1/4 square triangles, what size do I need to cut my fabric? How's about if I'm making combination units? It's all given to you on your tool instructions. A lot of people like to call that tuckerizing a pattern. Just because your pattern says to cut it at a certain width, you can always change that and use another tool. So I hope you enjoyed my demo. I would just like to show you a couple of blocks that I've made that will showcase these techniques that I've showed you here today. Here's one block that shows some of the units that we made today. So here is your mirror image combination units on the sides, and here are your half square triangles set like a pinwheel, and it makes a very attractive block. The other units we made today were the quarter square triangles or hourglass units and the shaded 4-patch. Put together, this makes another very attractive block. So today I showed you how to use the Tucker Trimmer 1, and it does 11 different sizes. I told you that the Tucker Trimmer 3 was like the Tucker Trimmer 1 on steroids, and it does 24 different sizes. Everything that we did today, you can do with the Tucker Trimmer 3, and the Tucker Trimmer 3 is my tool of choice whenever I'm going to square up a block. The lines on it are so easy to follow, and it makes so much sense when you're doing it that I use it all of the time. The Tucker Trimmer 2, because it's in a 1/4 inch and 3/4 inch increments, I don't use as much. If you had a pattern that specifically calls for trimming at those dimensions, then it would be a very, very helpful tool to have. So I teach the Tucker University classes here at the store. Tucker University is something that came about with 2 of Deb Tucker's certified instructors. They were the brains behind the operation. So what I teach in these classes is each one of Deb's tools, and they're taught in sequence, starting with the Tucker Trimmer 1, then we go to the V block, then we go to the wing clipper to make flying geese, and then we do the square squared. There are 13 different techniques that I show in Tucker University Year 1, and this is best learned from the beginning because we build upon the techniques we've learned in previous classes as we go along. There is a rapid fire Lemoyne star tool. Now there is a series of rapid fire Lemoyne classes. The first one is the basic construction class, and then we go into 3 classes that showcase advanced techniques using the rapid fire Lemoyne star tool. That one you don't need any previous Tucker experience to take, and Lemoyne stars are highly addictive. They are so much fun to make, everybody enjoys them. Deb has a YouTube channel, and on her YouTube channel she has videos for every tool that she has, and they are excellent. So I encourage you to watch some of them and see what all the hype is about when using these tools. Like I said in the beginning, I wouldn't quilt any other way. So I hope you enjoyed this demo, and I hope you can see the value of this tool. Because these units are common in quilting, every quilter should be able to make these and enjoy increased accuracy and precision using the Tucker Trimmer 1 or Tucker Trimmer 3. Thank you.